Look, I know we all love this Gohan.
I said before I could never forgive you!
Vegeta! Now's your chance!
But for me, this is the best iteration.
Videl, no! I've had enough!
I think Akira Toriyama had it right when Gohan took over the story after the Cell arc. His character is far more relatable. I think it's far more interesting. I love the idea that he's trying to balance a life as a teenager, a life as a student, a life as a protector, versus when he was a kid. And he was still very interesting, don't get me wrong, because I know there's going to be a lot of people who are like, you know, Teen Gohan, Super Saiyan 2 Gohan when he's fighting Cell is peak. And in terms of strength, yes, he is peak. But in terms of rich character, I would argue that High School Gohan has more character than Teen Gohan. Now, did Teen Gohan have a great character arc? You know, exploding to acknowledging he's a protector rather than a fighter. You know, he's fighting to protect the ones he loves. He's not doing it for the joy of it. And, you know, that realization Goku has with that. And, you know, that seed of growth he had when he was young about that rage that gave him his power. And he was a prodigy as a fighter. And that rage activated that. Finally culminating in Gohan being able to acknowledge that and acknowledge that protecting the world through Android 16 speech was something that was okay to do. Something that he was allowed to unleash those feelings on and not to feel bad about it. Great character arc. But I think, you know, going into the future and having that several year gap between the end of the Cell saga and heading into the kind of tournament arc pre-Majin Buu is where Gohan, I think, is at his best.
7 years have passed since the fight with Cell, blissfully unaware of who it was that actually saved them from the android menace.
Because he's been nerfed a little bit, sure, but it makes entire sense because Gohan isn't just balancing, you know, being the new protector of Earth and taking over the mantle from Goku. He's also, you know, living on what Chi-Chi wants for him. He's also a teenager. He's also trying to understand what it is to be in high school, to make friends, to fall in love, to be a big brother, protecting and training Goten. He has so much more. Goku lived in a world that enabled him. You know, he loved fighting and that world enabled him to fight. Gohan is not in a world that enables his whims. He is one that is a character of conflict and struggle and is still coming to terms with being a protector and still coming to terms with how to live life. You know, Goku didn't have to go to school. Goku didn't even really have to try to fall in love or manage dating. And Goku didn't have to necessarily hide his identity because he didn't really live in a world that was so real. The world that we find Gohan living in this time skip is a world that is very relatable to our own. It's a world that, you know, has cameras and a world that would report, you know, these fights going on. Where when Goku was a kid, you know, all his fights kind of took place in secret or in the woods or the Red Ribbon Army's secret base or, you know, obviously when it came to stuff like Piccolo, yeah, there was that. But, you know, the world kind of knew who he was for a few days and forgot about it, and it didn't impact his life. Where Gohan is living in a world where, you know, post-Cell saga, where Hercule has taken the credit for the fight, something that he's glad of. You know, he wants to protect his family's aminosity. He's not just protecting his family by fighting, he's protecting by hiding a part of who he is, which is also very tough, because I find that also too a very relatable character construct. Suppressing a part of who you are. And similar to when he was a kid trying to suppress his rage, that was his power in turn. But this being a far more understandable human trait of suppression, Of course, in his case, it is suppressing being a Super Saiyan and being very powerful. And I know a lot of critics say, Gohan's weaker now. But he's been nerfed. He's not weak by any stretch of the imagination, and I think it gives his character a little bit of room to grow, trying to figure out how to be strong while also trying to figure out his human side, And I think, creating these predicaments and fights where Gohan struggles with this balance, and again, it really is classic Spider-Man stuff, Far more than Goku ever had. Far more so. And a far more relatable, intriguing character as a result. I mentioned in my last Dragon Ball video that I found Z Goku to be very interesting because he had inner conflict with being good-natured, wanting to fight, but not ultimately wanting to hurt people in terms of, murdering them. We saw that with Frieza. But with Gohan, he's far even more so that he doesn't really even enjoy the fighting. He fights to protect and he fights to save. He doesn't fight for the enjoyment of it. And that's something that became fully apparent with Cell. But now something that's become in a more actualized, realized world where Gohan has so many different responsibilities. And I think Akira Toriyama's editors often got it right trying to rein him in. You look at the Cell saga and you look at the fact that he created the androids with androids 19 and 20, and then, we see that they were like, we're not sure they're the best, so then he created 17 and 18, and then of course they were like, we're still not sure, and he created Cell, and it created, for most people, maybe the best part of Dragon Ball. And Akira Toriyama wanting Gohan to take over, I think was the right play. And I think introducing Goku in the Majin Buu saga where he just had a day is a great use of him because, it's on a time limit, It's basically like, I like the idea of Goku being overpowered, but he can't really be around to use it. So Gohan, has ideals to live up to of how strong he could become, like, hypothetically a Super Saiyan 3. But, Goku isn't around to use that power. He remains in that teacher role, like I discussed previously in my last video I wrote about Goku's Z character arc. So Gohan, in this time period, and I specifically mean the Gohan from the time skip starts to him being in high school to him trying to be Great Saiyaman and figuring that out, all the way up to when Majin Buu nearly kills him. I think that for me is, when he goes to the the Supreme Kai's planet, I think that's where things kind of fall apart a little bit again. So for me, when I talk about peak Gohan or a Gohan I love, it's the Gohan that I think has the best slice of life episodes in all of Dragon Ball. I think that period where he's training Goten, finding out he's a Super Saiyan, when he's trying to go to his classes and he's trying to sneak out to be Spider-Man. And I think it's the Gohan that is the most relatable, has the most layers, like Shrek says, it's an onion. There's many, many layers to Gohan here.
No! Layers! Onions have layers. Ogres have layers. Onions have layers.
That I think if Toriyama could have continued writing it, and fair enough, maybe the interest wasn't there from the reader, but as someone who has grown up myself and who has matured, I understand that thinking, I want the strong Gohan. But I want a Gohan who is layered, and I want a Gohan who has to deal with real life issues while also being a fighter. And I think that would for me, if the story kept going in that direction. And then Goku's was used very sparingly from Otherworld for, commenting on Gohan's fights maybe, or maybe giving him advice somehow from time to time. That would have been awesome. Let's look at the scene in particular, which I will throw in at the beginning of the video, where Gohan is watching Videl get crushed by Spopovich. And that internal struggle of his that rage also resurfaces, that thematic rage. And of course, who wouldn't be enraged by this scene. It was actually the most uncomfortable Dragon Ball scene, I think, in the entire arc of any series, was Videl being absolutely smashed by Spopovich. But, you know, Goku being like, you know, trying to restrain him. And, you know, he's also trying to restrain the fact that he's been hiding his identity this time, wants to protect his family. He doesn't want to become an infamous celebrity. But, you know, he can't stand there looking at his loved one, you know, someone he's falling in love with, go through that. And, that's... When I watch Dragon Ball and I'm watching a scene where Vegeta and Goku are watching Gohan losing his mind, and they're trying to say, you know, you can't interrupt the match just yet, you know, and he's like, I don't care. And he's showing, you know, more maturity in that scene than the other two guys are. That's just, I love it. I love it. I don't know if you can feel my passion for those kind of scenes. And also, can we just say aesthetically, from a color palette, a design point of view, the fact that it echoes the Saiyaman personality, but with Gohan, when he's wearing, and I think a lot of people are going to agree with me on this, the fit for Gohan where he's wearing the complete black suit, but he still actually has the green Saiyaman overalls on, and he goes Super Saiyan 2 in the arena, is probably one of my favorite power-ups ever. You know, that moment where the eyes spark green first. And, you know, we all know with Gohan, if he has enough rage, he's going to ascend his power anyway. So I really like that he's in this. He's not overpowered. He's not underpowered. He has something to strive for, and he has something to deal with, and he has the world around him to deal with. And side note, I think it's super interesting as well, you know, if we take his great Saiyaman personality. I remember watching and reading some bits about how when Gohan was growing up and he was on Namek and, you know, he had to face the Ginyu Force and he got his neck snapped. Like, that was brutal. But I think it's very interesting psychologically profiling Gohan from that moment, that he was so traumatized by the Ginyu Force and what happened there, that he kind of internalized a part of their personalities and, you know, is kind of expressing it through the Great Saiyaman. And even more so if we look at Android 16 and his color palette, and, you know, that scene where, you know, his head is lying on the floor and he's telling Gohan that, you know, it's okay to fight to protect what you love. It's okay to, you know, unleash your rage for those reasons, you know, and being so inspired by that. And he has that in the costume outfit as well. I don't know how intentional that was, but I love my headcanon to think that those two big moments for him somehow articulated his current design and his current mantras and his current, you know, successes and failures. So I love that. And I think if we were to, like, take a step back and, you know, we look at him when he was a kid and he was super, super shy, and, you know, he was relatable in that too. And then, of course, having such immense powers and being such a prodigy and having to train with Piccolo and wanting to impress everyone around him at the same time. Like, so relatable from that point on too. And again, all the different fighting scenarios he was put in with the Saiyans, he was constantly being pushed and he was constantly being traumatized. Like, let's be real here. You know, Goku fought as a kid because he somewhat wanted to, and of course he was protecting, and of course he went through serious emotional trauma, like with Krillin dying. But Gohan was constantly being put in these scenarios around adults. And I just think the current Gohan deserves to live life. I know sometimes when we're younger watching Dragon Ball, we selfishly just loved him so much being powerful that we want him to be powerful again. But I think if we sit back and retrospectively look at it as grown-ups, hopefully, I think maybe you can see where I'm coming from, why I think this high school Gohan is probably the most actualized, realized, and most human character in all of Dragon Ball. And maybe a part of that is why some people don't like him, because, you know, we watch Dragon Ball to escape sometimes, and maybe this Gohan reminds us too much of ourselves, you know, our shortcomings, or maybe some of our failures, or what we struggle with. And maybe Dragon Ball is always supposed to be a power fantasy. But for me, you know, as a 33-year-old Dragon Ball fan, I look back on this Gohan and I actually find him the most interesting, and I think we could have had some of the greatest stories to come out of this style of Gohan. I think, unfortunately, then, because of the pressure of bringing Goku back, you know, we got Ultimate Gohan or Mystic Gohan, And for me, he kind of loses it there because he gets a power-up that isn't foreshadowed. You know, it kind of comes out of a magic wish, essentially. And this Gohan that comes back that is overconfident, and then still gets his ass kicked anyway, and kind of just gets pushed to the side where Goku and Vegeta have to come back again. You know, it was unrealized, it was unfulfilled. And you could really feel that Toriyama had his foot half dipped into the idea of Gohan taking over past that point, because I'm sure, you know, there was pressure for the show to continue to be accessible, or the manga, I guess, in this case, not so much the show. And obviously the show taking, you know, inspiration from that, directly continuing on the show the way the manga was written. So yeah, I just kind of feel that Gohan falling in love, his past traumas, him wanting to fit in, him also still trying to impress people, him still trying to train, him still trying to do all these different things, creates a lot of nuances, subtleties, and conflicts in him. And while I think that Super Saiyan 2 Teen Gohan has a lot of that and he's still awesome, I think high school Gohan has all that with real human issues. Guys, thank you for listening to another unscripted rant about why I love high school Gohan. But just up till when Majin Buu kind of almost kills him. I think again after that it gets a bit wishy-washy. I'd love for you to agree and disagree with me, but I'd love to hear your points down below. And remember, this is just for fun, it's just a subjective opinion. So if you disagree with me, I love that. And if you agree with me and you think you found a voice in what I'm saying about why you like that Gohan 2 and it kind of articulates it for you, all the better as well. Guys, thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next video. You can also catch my streams at kick.com/steamy_streamers if you want to check out some gaming content. And until the next one,